Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is John Herbst. I'm the director of the Dinu Patriciu Eurasia Center here at the Atlantic Council. We have a great treat for you this morning. We have the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk. I am not going to read you his bio. Let me just make the point that he held the second highest position in Ukraine and was a key, perhaps the key driver on reform in the first 18 months of the post-Maidan Ukraine. And with that, I'll bring up the Prime Minister and let him speak to you. Thank you all very much.
Well, distinguished audience, Ambassador, thanks for having a chance to address you. You know, I'm just hovering around the DC, trying to establish a new program how to create jobs, both in the United States and in Ukraine. And you know the reason why? It's important for the jobless Prime Minister to find a new job. Look, we've passed a very complicated period in the history of my country. And my government faced tremendous challenges. And this government, which was sworn in a few months ago, needs to address a number of challenges too. So the good thing is that we have the new Prime Minister, we have the new cabinet, we still have the coalition, which is quite fragile, but we have the coalition which is based on two parties, pro-presidential party and the party of the former Prime Minister. We have a clear-cut reform agenda, but what we needed, what I believe is of crucial importance for the Ukrainian people and for the Ukrainian politicians, we need to have a very strong political will. So what's on the map? First of all, in terms of financial sector, and I will probably elaborate on this, we did a lot, and for today, we got the first signs of economic recovery. So positive GDP growth, quite low inflation. So the situation really stabilized. We decreased the budget deficit from 10.5% to 2.5%. So that's practically 4 times. We passed a number of austerity packages, which were not really popular, and that's the reason why the government was unpopular. But it's not about the popularity. This is about the right things that needs to be done. We did it. We passed a number of legislation in e-procurement, anti-corruption bills, energy efficiency was, is, and our priority. So this is for the first time in the Ukrainian history when during the winter Ukraine didn't purchase any single meter of natural gas from Russian Gazprom. But despite this, the new government, which is to get my full and unwavering support in the reform agenda, is to pass another set of legislation, which is practically the part of our MOU with the IMF and other international financial organizations. And new anti-corruption bodies have been established, and they already started an investigation against a number of members of the Ukrainian parliament and other officials who committed, suggestively or allegedly, who committed corruption crimes. The government, together with the president and the coalition, passed a sweeping judicial reform. So we successfully grabbed a qualified majority for the constitutional amendments, and this gives us a real chance to revet and replace all corrupted judges in Ukraine and to put in place a real rule of law state in Ukraine. So once again, going back to the issue of the agenda, the new government and the president is to accomplish the reform agenda, which is to be in line with our MOU with the IMF. The new government and the president and the coalition is to implement our judicial reform. The new government is to grab support of all pro-reformist forces in the Ukrainian parliament. And most important issue is that both the president and the government have to communicate directly to the Ukrainian people. It's not an easy job, but you need to win the public opinion. Despite the fact that, look, there is an ongoing mess in the world. Everyone is promised everything to everyone. No taxes, high wages, zero retirement age. You can just retire from the kindergarten. You know, a wave of just despicable populism. This is the problem, not only in Ukraine. I've had some rumors that you guys had the same problem in the US. So I have another stump speech for a few hours, but I believe it's better to switch to Q&A session. Yeah? Perfect.
Okay, I'll take the privilege of asking the first question, and then I'll turn it over to the floor for people to jump in. Mr. Prime Minister, corruption has been a major problem in Ukraine since independence. People talk all the time about the outsized influence of oligarchs. What can you say about this problem in contemporary Ukraine?
Ambassador, I believe that you will give me a chance to tell you only the facts, okay? The fact is, it's true that corruption exists. The fact is, it's true that corruption exists not only in Ukraine. Okay? The fact is that we did a lot to decrease the level of corruption and to get rid of a very strong influence of Ukrainian tycoons and oligarchs out of Ukrainian politics and out of Ukrainian economy. So I will try probably to name a number of Ukrainian tycoons and just to provide you with the information you can easily stomach. One of the most notorious Ukrainian tycoons, Mr. Firtash, who is under FBI investigation. He was the key interlocutor between Kremlin, Russian Gazprom, and Ukrainian state-owned enterprise Naftogaz, which is oil and gas company. This guy controlled all energy flows in Ukraine. They suck out of the state budget billions of dollars. There is no more Firtash. There is no more middlemen. Just direct deals and contracts between state-owned enterprise Naftogaz and 7 EU-based companies. No more kickbacks. And no more folks who control Naftogaz on behalf of Firtash or another Ukrainian tycoons. We took over all state-owned assets that had been illegally leased by his companies. Another Ukrainian tycoon, Mr. Akhmetov, for the first time in the history of my country, the previous government increased taxes on iron ore and on another stuff that is produced by his companies. The government eliminated direct donations to the electricity sector that were created a few years ago. The said Ukrainian tycoon, Mr. Kolomoisky, for the first time in the history of my country, the government introduced to the parliament, and the parliament approved and supported the bill that allowed the government to take over the control of one of the biggest oil companies in Ukraine, where Mr. Kolomoisky is a shareholder in minority. So we appointed the new CEO, we appointed the new supervisory board, and we started to fix the problem in Ukernafta. So my take is that's about Ukrainian oligarchs. So on the side of the way how to tackle corruption, rule of law, this makes us this is the key agenda to tackle corruption in my country. So what we have done, an anti-corruption bureau is already established. The bureau started a number of investigations, and FBI provided train and equip program for Ukrainian agents and detectives. New general attorney have been appointed, and a sweeping reform of the prosecutor's office under the auspices of Mr. Lutsenko, who is Attorney General, new Attorney General of Ukraine, has been already launched. including Mr. Lutsenko, is to establish an Inspector General office in the prosecutor's office. Third, constitutional amendments. Because, you know, the thing is that you can't tackle corruption, for example, only in one sphere. This is to be a full-fledged system. And you can't win the fight against corrupted officials or against corruption having corrupted judges. You know, who is to judge? Those who take bribes? So, there was an ongoing debate with the president. So we discussed the constitutional reform with the president for 6 months. But we succeeded. With a qualified majority, we passed the constitutional amendments. We created a new independent judicial body. We stripped off the powers from the president and from the House to appoint judges. We eliminated political influence on the judges. And we already launched the process of re-vetting and replacing of every single judge. Today in the morning, the constitutional amendments have been published in the Ukrainian media, so it's practically, legally, they have been enacted just a few hours ago. So-called e-declarations. A few months ago, we passed the bill that urges every single public official to disclose its asset, revenues, and expenditures. As far as I remember, this declaration practically has 40 pages. It's much tougher than in the United States of America. So you have to report to the Ukrainian people every single asset you have. And in case if you misconduct or deliberately misinform, on purpose, misinform the Ukrainian people, there is a criminal penalty. Another thing, could you imagine that you can easily, for example, right now log in into the e-system of Justice Department, okay? And you can track down every single asset of the former or of the current Prime Minister. What kind of apartments you have, what kind of real estates you have, what kind of companies you have, what kind of vehicle you're driving. So full transparency. And Ukrainian journalists are and were very happy with this kind of transparent system. The problem we are facing, extremely low wages in the public sector. Okay? $200 for the public official? Look, they will take bribes. Okay? They need to feed their families. And the thing is that I asked a number of times our European friends, it's awesome that you guys send us hundreds of different experts, and we truly appreciate this. But we will appreciate if we together with our European partners will establish a top-up fund for the transition period to increase wages and salaries in the Ukrainian public sector. We passed a sweeping reform of the public sector. So for today, every single public official is not to be just appointed by the government, but this is to be an open bid, a special commission, an independent commission. I won't say it's a copycat case of Poland, but something that resembles Polish experience. So this is a huge step forward. But once again, to attract smart and effective folks, you need to pay them. This is one of the incentives of having really efficient and strong public service.
Thank you. Questions? Please identify yourself before you.
Thank you very much. Sergei Meshirak, Ukraine. I would like to continue the question as far as concern corruption. You know that during Yanukovych time, the enforcement agencies were transferred to the instrument of racketeering activity with mass violation of human rights and fabrication of criminal cases. This group created the syndicates, which were very active in different spheres and especially in the financial. And one of the concrete recent example, which is now actual, is the Ukrainian Innovation Bank. during Yanukovych time, the Pshonka, the prosecutor general, with some officials, they made hostile takeover of the bank by racketeering activity after they took the refinancing from the national bank. And just a few months ago, this bank was declared as insolvent. So the state, the Deposit Guarantee Fund compensated $80 million to people who put the deposits. And it's not the fantasy, but few weeks ago, the administrative court made the decision that the bank have to be turned to the former owners of the bank who participated in looting and stealing of billions of dollars. So could you, as a head of political force, which have your representative in the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, in the Minister of Internal Affairs, in the Minister of Justice, took this case under the control for these criminal groups could be have the criminal responsibility and stop their criminal activity, and also to protect the people who were trying not stop them, and who against which the cases, criminal cases, were fabricated during the Pshonka time and still are implementing by the means of money of the people nowadays. Thank you very much, and this is a very concrete example, and thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, sir, for the question. Let's be frank. The previous law enforcement agencies and both General Attorney's Office and Homeland, they failed in investigating a number of cases. That's the reason why we established a new anti-corruption bureau. That's the reason why we hired new folks. That's the reason why we paid them from $2,000 to $4,000 per month. It's a huge amount of cash in Ukraine, okay? That's the reason why we have new PGO, new Prosecutor General. And I have full trust in him personally, because, you know, he wants to deliver. What is needed? We need a very strong cooperation and information sharing between Ukraine and a number of Western countries. I don't want to dig into details, but Homeland launched an investigation against 2 Ukrainian high-profile officials, members of the cabinet practically, okay? Last year, we sent a legal request to one of EU member states asking them to disclose an information on the bank accounts and ultimate beneficiaries of the companies that suggestively have some links to Ukrainian members of the cabinet. You know what's in the end? We didn't get any kind of reply for 12 months. So a very strong cooperation, interagency cooperation between Ukrainian law enforcement agencies and the same agencies stationed in a number of EU member states, because, you know, they've stolen cash. They transferred this cash to a number of zones onshore or offshore zones, and you can get any kind of information. So you can bring them to justice as you're out of evidences and proofs. Once again, going to the issue that you've just raised, so it's no doubt that this is on the radars of the new Attorney General and new Anti-Corruption Bureau.
Okay, thank you. Anders?
Anders Åslund, Atlantic Council. Lovely to see you here, Arseniy, and I must congratulate you upon everything that you accomplished in terms of economic reform in Ukraine last year. I always emphasize that Ukraine has never done as much reform as it did last year. My question, however, is about what you did not discuss as yet, and that's the Minsk process. What do you see will happen with Donbass, and how do you look upon this side conversation between Victoria Nuland and Putin's aide, Vladislav Surkov? Thank you.
As I briefly answered this question yesterday, so I wasn't present at the meeting of Toria in Moscow. But once again, we have full trust in Assistant Secretary and in the US administration, because they stick to the values and they stick to the principles. In terms of the Minsk process, it's not an easy question, and let me be very open and frank. We had just two options, bad and worse. The worst option not to have Minsk, the bad option is to have Minsk. I was once again astonished with today's statement of President Putin. It's as always extremely cynical when he said that he's in full support of making Ukraine a successful case story. You know, it's not even kidding. Okay. So what's really happening on the ground? Once again, let's only talk about the real facts. The fact is that under the Minsk deal, Ukraine passed the constitutional amendments on so-called decentralization in the first reading. This is the fact. The fact is that under the Minsk agreement, Ukraine passed an amnesty bill. The fact is that under the Minsk deal, Ukraine passed a bill on special status of Donetsk and Lugansk. The fact is that President Poroshenko ordered to pull back forces from the touchline, and he publicly ordered the ceasefire to put in place. So that's what we've done. And the fact is that Ukrainian people are very disenchanted what's happening in Donetsk and Lugansk. And what's real, and the thing is that it was so difficult to grab the support of Ukrainian politicians and Ukrainian lawmakers to pass the legislation that I already indicated. And both the president and myself, we paid the political price for these kind of difficult decisions. So what's happening on the other side? I mean, Russians. Is there any ceasefire on the ground? No. Russian military and Russian soldiers and Russian guerrillas, they are still killing Ukrainian soldiers and innocent civilians. There is an ongoing shelling every single day. They do not allow OSCE to observe and control a number of blind spots. Russia did anything in implementation of the Minsk deal, just zero. It's a lip service. What is the goal of Russia? Whether President Putin really wants to have Ukraine, well, he really wants to have Ukraine, that's true. Whether he wants to see Ukraine as a prosperous state, no. Whether he wants to see Ukraine as a member of the European Union, you know, UA instead of UK, no. Whether he wants to have pro-Western government and pro-Western president to be in Ukraine, no. So what he wants? He wants to restore spheres of interest or spheres of influence. He wants to fight with the US and the European Union. He wants to split the EU. And after Brexit, I expect that they are drinking champagne in Kremlin. He wants to split the unity between the US and the European Union. And he doesn't need Donetsk and Lugansk and Crimea. What he needs an entire Ukraine. But what he already got? We deterred Russian forces. We protected our homeland. We built up a new army. And we are the only country in Europe which is fighting against well-equipped, armed to the teeth Russian army. And we need the support. We are not just fighting for our borders and for our independence and our territory. We are fighting for the European borders and for the NATO member states' borders too, and for the peace and stability in the entire Europe. And this is the message I want to deliver to every single member of the free world. It is to be really free, and we want to be free. We can make it only in case if we act in concert and if we are united. And if we stick to the values but not value.
Thank you. Agnew.
Agnew Grigas, Atlantic Council. Excellent remarks, Prime Minister. I have a question. You mentioned that energy efficiency was and is a top priority. Could you comment a little bit more how you see the gas sector of Ukraine in the medium term, focusing on efficiency, maybe boosting domestic production, or continuing reverse flows of Russian gas through Europe, or maybe other options? Thank you.
This is one of the biggest reforms that we started, not yet accomplished, but it's in progress. So what has been made on this way? First of all, we had to increase household tariffs to the market price. This is a very painful decision. Ukrainian people, they really feel the pinch. Okay? Complicated economic situation. A number of Ukrainian families are in a dire plight due to the war, depreciation, high inflation, and the government was obliged to make this step. So the previous and this government, the thing is that under the last resolution of the government, we imposed a market prices in the Ukrainian energy sector. This was the first issue. The second one, we entirely overhauled the system of the corporate governance in one of the biggest Ukrainian state-owned enterprises that I already indicated, Naftogaz. This is oil and gas company. The third issue, we substantially decreased the deficit of Naftogaz. The fourth issue, we eliminated all these middlemen, all these vampires that have been sitting in Naftogaz. The fifth issue, on an open bid, we signed up a number of direct deals with the EU-based companies. The sixth issue, we decreased the gas consumption by 20% last year. The seventh one, we launched a large-scale subsidies program for those in need. Because could you imagine, if you increase household tariffs and people just, well, people are unhappy, to be very polite. Right? But the government is obliged to provide those in need. 7 million Ukrainian households got direct subsidies from the government. Put it in a nutshell, in case if you pay more than 10% of your average monthly income as a utility bill, so the government offsets all of the rest. And this was the way how to survive last winter. We didn't have any riots, we didn't have any social unrest, and we communicated with the Ukrainian people and we convinced them that please trust the government. We know that you hate the government, okay? But please, get some trust and confidence in what we are saying and what we are doing. Then, with Secretary Pritzker, last year we signed the roadmap. And the part of this roadmap, it was one of the most important issues that had to be resolved by the previous government, is to slash, how you call it? It's not a rent tax, taxes, royalties, right? So we slashed royalties in the gas sector by 4 times in order to attract international investors and to increase the amount of gas which is to be extracted from our natural resources, from the Ukrainian companies. So my take is that I missed we brought Russians to court. In 2014, we sent a claim to Stockholm International Tribunal, and we expect that by the end of the year, the court will rule out the final verdict. So I expect that in a 10-year perspective, Ukraine will be absolutely energy independent. And we won't buy any single meter of the natural gas, neither from Russia nor from Europe.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Adrian Karmazin with the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. Mr. Yatsenyuk, can you talk a little bit about political parties in Ukraine, specifically about the ideology or the platform of Narodny Front, People's Front? How do you differ from other political parties? And elections are a year, 2, 3 years away. And how do you position yourself compared to other parties? Thank you.
We can dig into details of party ideology, but I will try to explain you my personal approach and the way my party acts. This is the most disciplined faction in the House, the strongest, united, and solidified. This faction always supported every single bill. And I, as a leader of this party and the former Prime Minister, I never cared about polls. Never. Because I do what I believe in. What is and what is needed and will be needed for this country. At this particular juncture, this is very unpopular. But you know what's the difference? You can be popular in a short run. And then people will just forget about you. We had a number of these kind of politicians. Once again, if you promise everything to everyone. But the idea we have is to build up the bedrock, the base, for the strong country. And the price for this is very high. I mean, mainly political price. I am not the most popular politician in my country. But the history is to judge us. And Ukrainian people, they are very, very smart. They do understand everything. Okay? So let's wait and see. On the terms of ideology, what were the goals of my party? The first one is to protect the homeland, to build a National Guard, new army, and strong Ukrainian security and defense sector. The second is to do everything we can, to impose sanctions on Russia and to make Russia to pay the price for illegal annexation of Crimea and invasion into Donetsk and Lugansk. The third one is to support unpopular austerity and to pass every single of legislation to make Ukraine as a rule of law state, to make Ukrainian finances as a robust and strong. The fourth one is not to be at the loggerheads with the president and not to repeat the case scenario that Yushchenko and Tymoshenko had. Okay? Because in the end, they were fighting, okay? They were killing each other politically. So in the end, Yanukovych took the office of the prime minister and then the president. So sometimes you are obliged to make concessions. And you need to find the way how to cohabitate between the office of the president and the office of the prime minister. So frenemies, that's something that goes in the right direction.
Thank you. Okay. Right here.
Good morning, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm Laure Mendeville from the U.S. Bureau Chief for the French daily Le Figaro. You talked about the key importance of the help from the West, both from the US and from Europe. Can you tell us exactly what kind of help you need? And also, could you give us an assessment of where the US-Russia relationship is going according to you, from where you stand? I mean, we've seen that this relationship has been based a few years ago on this idea of reset, and then you had all these very important crises, the Ukrainian turnaround, and how do you see the relationship evolving? Do you think the Americans can keep thinking that on the one hand they can cooperate with Russia on topics like Syria, and on the other hand be tough on Ukraine? Thank you.
If I may, let me start with the thing that we were very upset with the decision of French Senate to leave sanctions against the Russian Federation. But we strongly believe that France is a strong ally of Ukraine. And France is to support Ukrainian people. And France is to support France. As once again, we are fighting not only for us. We are fighting for you. In terms of relations between the United States and Russia, I neither work nor in the Russian government nor in the government of the United States. But what I know and what I feel and what I believe in, I believe that the US is, as a leader of the free world, would never betray the values of the free world. Never. The US provided an unwavering support to the Ukrainian people. The US was the flagship in imposing sanctions against the Russian Federation. The US provided $3 billion of treasury guarantees for the Ukrainian financial sector, for the Ukrainian people. The US launched a train and equip program for Ukrainian National Guard and Ukrainian military. The US provided a number of technical support to reform Homeland, to reform PGO, at General Attorney's Office, to reform Ukrainian banking sector, to reform Justice Department. So it's not a lip service. These are real commitments and real deliverables. Police, I missed police. Look, that's one of the crucial reforms in my country. So we established a new, not corrupted police with the support of the United States government. The US participated in Geneva format, which I do believe was the best one. But then it switched to Normandy. No doubt that the United States government has plenty of issues on their radars. Terror attacks, ISIS, refugees, nuclear proliferation. And no doubt that the US will try to find some kind of way of communication with the Russian government. But what am I sure about? It would happen not at the price of Ukraine.
Thank you. Okay, right here.
Thank you very much. I'm Elaine Soreo. I'm the Associate Rector of WIAU in Kiev, Ukraine. I really like to tie 2 points together that you've made. I'm very interested in hearing more about your vision for the top-up fund. I think it sounds incredible. And the other is, you mentioned a number of different ways Mr. Putin's responses to Ukraine, and then tying in the U.S. responses. And presently we have the Republican potential, the nominee, Mr. Trump, will probably has strong business ties to Russian businesses that are reportedly mafia organized. And also his present, I believe his current manager of his campaign was the former campaign, I don't know, remodeler of Mr. Yanukovych. And so what we had, and then of course we've had Mr. Trump make a number of different statements at different times about his admiration for Mr. Putin, and likewise Mr. Putin for Mr. Trump. So in the course of the future, it's hard to crystal ball things. What if something happens and we see a U.S. form of Brexit here?
Look, I will never meddle into your domestic politics. It's up to you to decide who is to be the next president of the United States. But no doubt that this will have a huge effect and either positive or negative implications on the global politics. So the oil plays a crucial roles in fighting for the values of the free world, in fighting for democracy, for liberty. Everything that you just said is not of my business. But knowing how politics unfolds, well, no doubt that you can't hide anything in the current world. And the truth is always the truth. It will appear on the surface. So I wish you to have a very good president of the United States.
Okay, thank you. Right here.
Thank you. I'm Aaron Koreva. I'm a visiting fellow at the McCain Institute. Thank you very much for your remarks, Prime Minister. People in the West need to be reminded what Ukraine is facing and Ukraine is fighting for. You already touched on this question, but I would like if you could elaborate a little bit on the Brexit thing. And of course, yes, you don't want to talk about internal politics in Britain, but I was wondering, are you worried that this might potentially strengthen the forces in Europe that are unfortunately taking Russia's side in this conflict, or are you worried that this might throw a monkey wrench into Ukraine's continuous efforts to associate with the European Union? I'd just like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the question. I am not worried. I am scared. Look what's happening in the European Union. Brexit could trigger a domino effect in the EU. There are a number of lunatics sitting in the national parliaments who will try to launch this kind of idea in another EU member states. What we need a united Europe, but not a divided. What happened after the Brexit? Everyone is looking at Europe as a weak institution. So we can't right now even assess the fallout of the Brexit. But this is not just a negative signal. This is not the signal. This is an action. The action that could split, the action that already made the European Union weaker, the action that could trigger a domino effect, the action that could undermine trust and confidence into the European idea, for example, among Ukrainian population. So we are affected by this Brexit too. As far as I see, there is no clear-cut contingency plan. Everyone was talking about the Brexit, but for today, no one knows what needs to be done. The current Prime Minister said that he is not to invoke Article 50. Another leader of his party, who was the leader of Brexit, today refused to take the office of the Prime Minister. He just quit it. Brussels is keeping silence. They made a number of statements, but just show us the way. Merkel, she was very pragmatic, as always. She was cautious. She said, look, guys, calm down, calm down. Wait, don't be in a hurry. So, it seems to me that the quicker the UK and leading EU member states will provide an answer to the world what's going to happen next, the better chances for the united Europe to be really united and to overcome this huge geopolitical crisis.
Mr. Prime Minister, Jim Slattery with Wiley Ryan. Good to see you. Glad that you have survived the mission that you described as a kamikaze mission, and glad to see you here today. I'm curious, what can you tell us about the displaced persons in Ukraine, 1.7, 1.8 million? How can we deliver humanitarian aid? What kind of aid is needed? How can it best be delivered?
So the official data gives the number of 1.9 million of people, IDPs, as internally displaced person, already registered. We started to revet this data. So at the first glance, probably from 300,000 to 500,000 people have to be revetted, okay, and re-registered. But this is the huge burden for the state budget, and this is a huge trauma for the people. So that's the reason why I strongly believe that we need to take back both Donetsk and Lugansk as quick as possible. So the government pays all social subsidies, and they are entitled to all social security and social entitlement programs. But the thing is that they need to get the job, they need to get room and board, and they need to feed their families, to get an education, to get the health care. So this is the huge burden, but despite this, look, we stomach this, we absorb this. We don't have riots, we don't have social unrest, and this is a very important lesson. Could you imagine if this happens in another country? So the situation is more or less under control.
Okay. Prime Minister has to leave very soon, so I'm going to take one more question. And over here.
Thank you very much. Arseniy, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Washington. Two questions.
David, not everyone knows who you are.
Sorry, David Kramer with the McCain Institute. Two questions, if I can. As you know, every time the EU comes up for renewal of sanctions, everyone says it's going to be difficult. December does look like it will be difficult, particularly with this country going through a presidential transition. There are certain EU member states that say sanctions are hurting us more than they're hurting Russia. It's time to get back to business as usual. What would you say to those countries who say it's time to lift sanctions, time to get back to a regular relationship with Russia? Second question is, unless something was announced today, the White House has indicated that next week President Obama will go to Warsaw for the NATO summit, and then we'll visit Spain. No plans to visit Ukraine. What would you say to the White House about the failure of the president to go to Ukraine, not just in the past 2 years, but during his entire time as president? Thanks.
David, thanks for the question, and I will try to put it in a nutshell. Mr. President, welcome to Kyiv. And Mr. President and the EU leaders, you are not allowed to lift sanctions against Russia until Russia fully implements Minsk and until Ukraine take over the control of Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea. Full stop. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for your time.
Thank
you
you
all for coming.
Take care.